There are some celebrity deaths that feel almost impossible to believe. And then there are the ones that make you stop, go back, and listen to the words that person said only days before they were gone. Dolly Parton was 80 years old when the world received the news nobody wanted to hear. The woman who spent more than 6 decades turning heartbreak into songs had died in Nashville. But what makes this moment so difficult to process isn't simply that Dolly is gone. It's what she was still saying about her future just days before her death. She was still talking about things she wanted to accomplish. She was still thinking about projects that had not yet come to life. She was still looking ahead. And then, suddenly, there was no next chapter. But there is another detail that makes this story even more haunting. Dolly had apparently thought about her own death long before anyone wanted to imagine it. She had prepared music that could be released after she was gone. She had spoken about what she believed waited beyond this life. She had even arranged something so personal that her nephew revealed today that she had asked him years earlier to be the person who would announce her passing. And somehow, after everything Dolly Parton accomplished, her final story may not be about fame at all. It may be about love, grief, faith, unfinished dreams, and one woman who spent her entire life making sure everyone else had something to hold on to. Because the closer you look at the final chapter of Dolly's life, the more one question becomes impossible to ignore. What did Dolly Parton really believe her final goodbye would mean? And why do some of her old words sound completely different now? For generations, Dolly Parton seemed almost larger than life. The hair, the rhinestones, the laugh, the voice, the songs, the unmistakable personality. She became the kind of celebrity people talked about as if she would simply always be there. But behind that enormous public image was a woman who thought about mortality much more practically than most people realized. Dolly didn't treat death as something that could never happen. She talked about it, planned around it, and even found ways to make sure that her creative voice could continue when she was no longer physically here. One of the most remarkable examples involved her music. Dolly had explained that she wanted to have enough material recorded and prepared so that her music could continue after her death. The idea wasn't simply to leave behind a vault of old recordings. She wanted her voice and creative work to remain usable, allowing new arrangements and projects to potentially be built around material she had already recorded. She had seen what could happen when major artists died and their unfinished work became complicated to manage, and she wanted a different outcome for herself. Think about how unusual that is. Most people spend their lives trying to create something that will be remembered. Dolly was thinking one step further. She was thinking about what would happen when she wasn't there to explain what she wanted anymore. She wasn't just writing songs for the present. She was preparing her voice for a future in which she would no longer be able to speak for herself. And perhaps that is why her relationship with death feels so different from the way most people talk about it. Dolly's faith was central to the way she understood life. She spoke about heaven with a sense of warmth rather than terror, imagining that she would still have music waiting for her. She could joke about it, sing about it, and talk about it without turning the conversation into something completely dark. But then something happened that gave her own songs an entirely different meaning. In 2012, Whitney Houston died unexpectedly. Houston's version of Dolly's "I Will Always Love You" had become one of the most recognizable recordings in modern music. Dolly had written the song decades earlier, but Whitney had transformed it into something enormous. Then came Whitney's funeral. Dolly later described hearing Whitney's version of her song played during the funeral as an experience that nearly stopped her heart. She said the finality of the moment hit her with extraordinary force because those were her words and feelings, now being used as part of Whitney's goodbye. Imagine what that must have felt like. Dolly was sitting there listening to one of the most famous songs she had ever written, but suddenly it wasn't just a song anymore. It was part of a funeral. It was a goodbye. It was a reminder that even the music we create to celebrate love can eventually become the soundtrack to someone's final departure. And there was something almost prophetic about that moment. Dolly had created a song about letting someone go, and years later she watched that song accompany Whitney Houston's family and fans as they said goodbye to her. Now, after Dolly's own death, that memory becomes even more painful. Because Dolly knew exactly how powerful a song could become at the end of a life. She understood what it meant for a voice to keep speaking after the person behind it was gone. She understood that a person's words could suddenly become more powerful after death than they had ever been while that person was alive. And then came the loss that changed Dolly personally in a way the public could never fully see. Carl Dean died in March 2025 after nearly 60 years of marriage to Dolly. Their relationship had always been unusual by celebrity standards. Dolly was one of the most recognizable women on earth, while Carl remained intensely private and largely stayed outside the spotlight. Their marriage endured while Dolly's career expanded into music, film, business, philanthropy, television, and theme parks. For decades, Dolly could step onto a stage in front of thousands of people and become the larger-than-life Dolly Parton the world expected to see. Carl knew the woman behind all of that. Then he was gone. And according to Dolly's own later comments, the consequences of that loss reached much deeper than fans initially understood. In a People interview published 4 days before her death, Dolly spoke candidly about her health and acknowledged that while caring for Carl and dealing with his death, she had neglected herself and allowed health issues to go unattended. That admission changes the way you look at the final year of her life. Because suddenly, the story isn't just about an aging superstar facing health problems. It's about a woman who had spent decades taking care of everybody else, building businesses, supporting family, helping children through her imagination library, creating music, encouraging people, and carrying enormous responsibilities, and then losing the person who had been beside her through so much of it. Grief doesn't always look like tears in front of a camera. Sometimes grief looks like continuing to work. Sometimes it looks like answering emails. Sometimes it looks like showing up for a project. Sometimes it looks like telling everyone you're fine because there are still people depending on you. And sometimes, as Dolly acknowledged, it can mean forgetting to take care of yourself. That makes one of the most important statements from her final days especially heartbreaking. Just 4 days before her death, Dolly spoke about her health and her determination to keep moving forward. Despite the difficulties she had been experiencing, she was still talking about work, projects, and things she wanted to see come to life. That is the part that is difficult to comprehend. She wasn't speaking as someone who had decided her story was over. She was speaking as Dolly Parton, the woman who always seemed to have another idea, another song, another project, another dream. She was still looking toward tomorrow. And then tomorrow came without her. That contrast is what makes her final words so emotionally powerful. We often imagine a final goodbye as something obvious. A person knows they are dying, gathers everyone around them, says the perfect words, and gives the world one final message. Real life rarely works that way. Sometimes the last meaningful words are ordinary words. Sometimes someone talks about what they want to accomplish next. Sometimes they discuss a project that will never be completed by them. Sometimes they tell people they plan to keep working. And only afterward do those words become a goodbye. That may be what happened with Dolly. She was still thinking about the future. She was still trying to bring things to life. She was still imagining ways she could perform, including discussing the possibility of technology that could allow her to participate in performances even when she couldn't physically do everything she once did. She wasn't surrendering to the idea that aging meant disappearing. She was trying to find another way forward. And that is one of the great contradictions of Dolly Parton's final chapter. She had prepared for death, but she wasn't obsessed with dying. She understood mortality, but she kept choosing life. She knew that eventually her voice would stop, but she spent her final years finding ways for that voice to continue. She knew people eventually leave this world, but she kept building things designed to outlive her. And perhaps the most extraordinary example came through the person who announced her death. Dolly's nephew Brian Seaver announced her passing through her social media channels. But the most striking part wasn't simply that he was the family member delivering the news. He said Dolly had asked him years earlier to make that announcement. Years earlier. Think about that. Before August 25, 2026 became the day the world lost Dolly Parton, Dolly had already imagined the moment. She had already decided who she wanted standing there when the time came. Her nephew explained that he had understood the request as something distant, something he could intellectually imagine but not emotionally comprehend. And then suddenly, the moment he had once imagined became real. That detail may be the closest thing we have to Dolly's own fingerprints on her final goodbye. She wasn't there to write the announcement. She wasn't there to explain how she wanted to be remembered. She had already arranged it. And her nephew's words carried another emotional layer. He described the announcement as an honor mixed with profound sadness, while framing Dolly's death through the faith she had expressed throughout her life. He spoke of her being in the arms of Jesus and reunited with Carl, her parents, and others she loved. For a woman whose faith was so deeply intertwined with her music, that framing matters. Dolly spent much of her life turning pain into something people could survive. She took childhood hardship and turned it into a coat of many colors. She took heartbreak and turned it into songs that millions of people carried through their own relationships. She took a goodbye and wrote, "I will always love you." And now the world is forced to hear those words differently. Because Dolly's greatest songs weren't really about avoiding pain. They were about surviving it. They were about accepting that people leave. They were about understanding that love doesn't disappear simply because a person does. That may explain why her thoughts about death never sounded quite like surrender. They sounded more like continuation. A continuation of music. a continuation of faith, a continuation of memory, a continuation of love. And perhaps that is why the loss of Carl Dean matters so much when understanding Dolly's final chapter. For decades, Dolly's public image was built around energy. She was constantly moving, constantly creating, constantly planning. But Carl's death introduced a different kind of silence. The man who had largely remained outside her spotlight was suddenly absent from the private world she returned to after the spotlight disappeared. And Dolly herself later acknowledged how deeply that period affected her health. That makes her final determination to continue working feel less like simple celebrity optimism and more like an act of resistance against grief. She kept going. She kept creating. She kept imagining. She kept talking about things she wanted to accomplish. And then, at 80, her story ended. But here's the strange thing. Dolly had already spent decades preparing the world for this moment without anyone realizing it. She had recorded music that could live beyond her. She had talked about heaven. She had contemplated her own funeral. She had watched one of her greatest songs become another woman's final farewell. She had arranged for a family member to announce her passing. She had built institutions and projects designed to keep helping people long after she was gone. And she had left behind something even more powerful than a catalog of songs. She left behind instructions for how to remember her, not as a perfect person, not as a woman who never experienced pain, but as someone who kept turning pain into something beautiful. And maybe that is the real reason this goodbye hurts so much. Because Dolly Parton made millions of people feel as if they knew her. She wasn't just a voice on a record. She wasn't just a face on television. She wasn't just the woman with the big hair and sparkling clothes. She was the person who seemed to understand something about ordinary people. She understood heartbreak. She understood poverty. She understood ambition. She understood losing people. She understood what it meant to keep smiling when life had given you reasons not to. And now the woman who wrote so many songs about saying goodbye has received her own. Her death was announced on August 25, 2026, at age 80, with reports saying she died peacefully in Nashville. The exact circumstances surrounding her death should not be turned into speculation. What we do know is that she had been dealing with significant health struggles and had openly discussed those struggles just days earlier. And perhaps we don't need a sensational explanation for why she died. The tragedy is already human enough. A woman lost her husband. Her health suffered. She kept trying to work. She kept dreaming. She kept planning. She kept looking forward. And then, without the grand finale anyone could have scripted, she was gone. But her voice wasn't. Her songs weren't. Her stories weren't. And the goodbye she had quietly prepared for years had finally arrived. So before you leave this video, take a moment and think about what Dolly Parton actually left behind. Not just the awards. Not just the records. Not just the famous songs everyone knows. Think about the strange and beautiful preparation she made for a future she would never personally see. She thought about what would happen to her music after she was gone. She thought about heaven. She thought about the people she loved. She even asked her nephew years in advance to be the one who would announce her death when that unimaginable day finally arrived. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part is that only days before her death, Dolly was still talking about what she wanted to accomplish. She was still looking toward the future. She was still determined to see her dreams come to life. That is how life sometimes works. We don't always know which conversation will become our last. We don't know which photograph will become the final photograph. We don't know which project will become the unfinished one. We don't know when tomorrow will stop being guaranteed. Dolly spent her life reminding people that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. She took difficult memories and turned them into songs. She took heartbreak and turned it into comfort. She took a childhood without much money and built an extraordinary life from it. And even when she spoke about death, she often did so with the same faith and humor that carried her through life. So perhaps her final goodbye isn't really goodbye at all. Perhaps it is simply the final page of a story she spent 80 years writing. A story that began in a tiny Tennessee home and ended with a voice known around the world. A story filled with love, loss, laughter, ambition, faith, and more songs than most people could write in several lifetimes. And if there is one thing Dolly Parton seemed to understand better than almost anyone, it is that people may leave, but what they give to others can remain. Her voice remains. Her songs remain. The children helped by her books remain. The people inspired by her generosity remain. The memories remain. And somewhere, millions of people are listening to a Dolly Parton song tonight and realizing that they aren't simply hearing music anymore. They are hearing a goodbye from someone who had spent her entire life teaching the world how to say goodbye. If Dolly Parton meant something to you, tell me in the comments what song of hers you will always remember. Was it Jolene? Coat of many colors. 9 to 5. I will always love you. Or was there another Dolly song that carried you through a moment in your own life? And if you believe Dolly deserves to be remembered for more than the fame, more than the rhinestones, and more than the headlines, share this video with someone who grew up listening to her. Because Dolly Parton spent her life giving people songs for their happiest moments, their saddest moments, their beginnings, and their goodbyes. Now it's our turn to remember her. And maybe, when the final notes of one of her songs play tonight, we won't hear the end. We'll hear what Dolly always seemed to believe was waiting on the other side. Another song, another reunion, another beginning, and one final, unforgettable goodbye.